It's a Thursday afternoon episode of the Bold Republic radio show. That means, of course, we head on down to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where this time we're joined by Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group, who's covering a topic that is very near and dear to something that irritates me. So I'm glad you're on it, Steve. And that would be civil forfeiture as one of the topics we're picking up today. Is that right?
Absolutely, Glenn.
Okay. Now, I'm curious if part of what you're going to tell us about today has anything to do with how the federal government has also moved recently, Congress is trying to, on civil forfeiture law, or are you just looking at what's happening in the state of Wyoming?
Well, Glenn, the history of civil forfeiture here in Wyoming, the federal involvement, it exists, but it's not actually that prevalent. Where we have what happened was the federal adoption program put on by Eric Holder kind of put to a stop, and there's a lot of discussion going on the internet between different legal experts as to what exactly that means, because the federal government can still pursue their own kind of forfeitures, and then it seems they can still pursue them at the request of state governments. What this does is seems to put an end to a certain amount of the sharing that's going on. And that's so it's very interesting and there's many different opinions. But the point is that here in Wyoming, especially at least in the last 10 years, there wasn't really much federal adoption going on to begin with, and there wasn't that much money coming back. Nebraska, Colorado, they see about $3 million a year come back from working with the feds on civil forfeiture, whereas Wyoming, I mean, we didn't even get $3 million in the last 10 years total. I mean, It's just not that much money coming back. But I guess I should start off, when we talk civil forfeiture, basically we're talking about drug laws. And
right.
The Wyoming Controlled Substances Act is a law that currently allows police here in Wyoming, with the help of the Attorney General's office, to seize property that they believe is related to the drug trade. That's cash, cars, firearms are typically the most commonly seized items. What happens then is, after the property is seized, the property owner is put in the position of having to go to court and prove that the property is legitimate. Instead of the government having to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to basically prove it's basically a 50-50 split. Whoever has the preponderance of the evidence, is what it's called, wins the case. So as a result, the deck is already kind of stacked in the government's favor, and you are not provided an attorney if you cannot afford one. And the big problem is that the median forfeiture, usually the amount that's seized here and put to test in a forfeiture case, is right around $2,000 here in Wyoming. So even if you can afford an attorney, it's not worth paying for one, because by the time, if you take the case to all the way to trial, it's going to cost more than $2,000 to get your $2,000 back, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So what's going on right now here in Cheyenne, what's been going on for about the last year, is there was an interim study between the 2014 and 2015 legislative session to craft a bill that would reform civil forfeiture here, that would change the Controlled Substances Act. What came out of that was a committee bill, a bill sponsored by the Joint Judiciary Committee, that will replace forfeiture with a criminal system, with the idea that instead of having a civil forfeiture trial that goes after your stuff and a criminal forfeiture or a criminal case that goes after the individual, we're going to put them together. And so there will be, if you commit a drug felony and you're charged with that felony, the government does all the things we hold near and dear, particularly under our Fifth and Sixth Amendments of the Constitution, and they put you through a trial and say you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The government has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed a drug felony. Usually you're carrying, lots of drugs and you had the intent to distribute them. And then after conviction, only after you are convicted of a drug felony, can the government then pursue forfeiture. Now, they can still seize your property before this happens, but they have to have a criminal case in the first place, and only will they be able to forfeit it after you have been convicted of a trial, or of a drug felony. So that's Senate File 14. That's what's going on at the Wyoming legislature right now.
How does that affect, and this is where the first I had heard of civil forfeiture was years ago, with problems on Interstate 10, which, of course, growing up in the South, that's a major artery for me. And that's the police pulling somebody over, and wow, you got a lot of money in your car. So obviously you're driving cross country to buy drugs, even though you could buy drugs in your own town. You don't need to drive cross country to do that. So how does that affect someone who's pulled over in the state of Wyoming and has a lot of money in their car? Can the officer still seize the money?
Well, first of all, I should say that the bill right now has passed the Senate, passed the Wyoming Senate about 2 weeks ago with a vote of 26-3, and it's on third reading tomorrow at the Wyoming House. So we have one more vote. We'll have the final vote in the House tomorrow, and then it's up to Governor Meade whether he wants to sign this or not, or maybe he might veto. You never know. He was a United States attorney before he was governor. I know he does support the current forfeiture system. He even sent his chief of staff to testify against the bill during the Senate Judiciary Committee when they took it up, which is pretty unusual. I've never actually seen a member of the governor's office testify for or against a bill before. But as to your question, Glenn, yes, but it's going to be a kind of indirect thing, because the way when I said earlier that seizure will not be affected, well, it will, because you have to have a criminal case. So the idea that you pull somebody over on I-80 or I-25 and they have lots of cash in the car and nothing else, or let's say a misdemeanor quantity. This is kind of how it has happened in certain Wyoming cases, where they'll find marijuana residue or a few seeds, and then they'll find all this cash, and they'll say, well, look at this, we've got evidence of drugs, even though it's not even enough drugs to support a misdemeanor charge. Then they take the money, and then they let the driver go on his or her way, and then they have to go, if they're lucky, they go lawyer up and they start to negotiate with the Attorney General's office. So it would. I think it will significantly change it but in kind of a roundabout way. That police and the AG are going to know we need to have a felony charge at least before we really pursue this. So the traffic stop, which is the typical way we use forfeiture, civil forfeiture in Wyoming, the vast majority of these cases are traffic stops. Now, I should add, though, it's not like those cash cases do happen, and those are the things I really want to cure with Senate File 14, because again, it's not just drug people that carry cash. It's someone you might have just sold something on Craigslist and you got paid cash for it, or you want to sell something on or you want to buy something off Craigslist and people want cash. So there's many reasons, legitimate reasons, and frankly, it's none of the government's business because it's not illegal to carry cash. Some people call that the American dream. So it really will affect it in a roundabout way, because if you don't have a felony case, there's probably not going to be a seizure to begin with. Now, again, I want to add, though, usually in Wyoming, when they're doing these cases, there's a lot of drugs involved. They're finding felony quantities, sometimes of very dangerous drugs, meth, cocaine. And Senate File 14 won't really change that. Then it's, well, you seize the drugs, you seize any property along with it, and here it goes, you arrest the driver because he's committed a crime. And then we go through the whole rigmarole, convict of a felony, take away the property. That I have no problem with.
Okay, now, what if, let's say they pull me over because I was going to go buy a car and I had thousands of dollars with me to purchase that new car, and so now I've lost my money and I have to go to court and fight this thing. What I would love to see is the loser of the case has to pay the court costs and the lawyer costs. So in other words, I win my money back. Does this bill allow me to be compensated for the costs of going to court?
No, Glenn, it doesn't, but we're eliminating the entire civil process, right?
Okay.
You're not going to have to deal with that until it's all going to happen in a criminal case, where if you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you, and usually you get one provided for you, even if even if it's a borderline kind of thing. So I don't recommend, in some cases, going with the public defender, not because they're unqualified, but because they're very overworked. But that's a whole other topic for another day.
Okay, and I just want to make sure all the bases are covered in something like this. Now and then we shoot videos here to illustrate a point like you're making right now in sort of a fun way. And I've written up a video that I hope to shoot this weekend, because we had a conversation with a couple of callers on this program asking the question, who would you rather have rob your $1,000 under your mattress, which, by the way, Steve, is becoming a trend today. People are putting more and more money in their house, not keeping it in the bank because they don't trust the bank. So if a common burglar broke into your house, well, you're just out the $20,000. But if the government is in your house and finds the $20,000 under your mattress, well, you can do a lot more than just lose your house. You might lose Well, you're going to have to deal with the IRS, I would guess. You're going to have to, they're going to take a look at your bank account. You're going to lose your 20,000 plus the house, probably the cars. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I was wanting to ask you, I'm glad you came on this week. If we shoot this video, am I on the right track with that analogy that I would rather have the burglar because of all the problems I'm going to have with the government if they rip me off?
Well, I mean, Glenn, you're getting into because the IRS has had problems with civil forfeiture as well, and I haven't directly dealt with that, but it's particularly some of these really scandalous situations of small business people who deal in cash, often be it service stations, take your pick, and they make consistent deposits in the bank of, say, $7,000, $8,000 at a time. The IRS has a reporting requirement anytime you go above $10,000, and they believe that anybody who consistently is depositing under $10,000 is trying to skirt their reporting requirement, which is a whole bunch of hogwash. So then they go and seize the money and ask questions later. So that's been the big scandal under the IRS. So the IRS isn't really doing drug forfeitures per se. They're doing this under the tax code, which is I know just enough about it to stay far and far away from it and fear the IRS more than just about anybody. So you're probably on the right track there, Glenn, as far as the who to fear the most. Yeah. But as far as under Wyoming law, under the Controlled Substances Act that we have, the cash itself gets seized. That often doesn't lead to other things. Now, the drugs, when they find drugs, it might lead to all sorts of things. Right. And unfortunately, it doesn't have to be felony quantity of drugs. It can be, as we've seen, marijuana residue, which I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that is. I think it's what the dog smells on the cash.
Could be,
might count. So that's where it gets kind of awkward. But I wouldn't, under the state law that we're trying to change, I wouldn't necessarily think that. And I got to point out that one of the pieces of testimony that was a little bit confounding brought by law enforcement was that this is civil forfeiture is a valuable tool that leads to these bigger investigations and helps with these larger investigations. And from our review in the Wyoming Liberty Group this fall, we went over to the AG's office, and to their credit, they were really good about letting us use their conference room for like a month to review 400 cases between 2008 and the present of what's actually gone on here in Wyoming. And that's the trouble is, far too often, these are not bigger cases. These are traffic stops and busts, and that's great, but it doesn't necessarily lead to anything bigger. And especially when you're dealing with, as you mentioned, and that's what all of us as law-abiding citizens fear, the seizures of cash, it's just take the money and let them go on their way. Now let's assume just for the sake of argument that every single one of these cases that's happened, where it's been a cash seizure or the like, it really is a drug dealer, right? You haven't really hurt the drug trade. What you've done, you're not really fighting drug trafficking. You're taxing it. That's really not what we call the justice system. That's not what we call due process. So that's kind of the thing that I don't think this is a tool that builds to bigger things. I actually fear this is kind of a silly contingency. It's kind of an admission of defeat that we can't fight the drug dealers. So hey, let's just take what we can. That's just, and I don't mean to be so cynical about it, but too often it really looks like that. And again, we have the opportunity to review what's actually going on, and that's my opinion. And I'm not out there in the files. Right.
Well, and at least it's not. And I'm glad when we first started talking about this, you were saying that you were trying to stop this before it got as bad as some other states, some other cities. Because I keep looking at the Reason Foundation as they've been covering, for example, Philadelphia, which I like to call Philadelphia. Which, I mean, that's what they've seized there from citizens, homes and cars and not just money. I don't think we've gone that far in Wyoming, so I'm glad that you're out there trying to put a stop to it before we get that far.
Absolutely, Glenn, and that's what I've said about Senate File 14. And I do not, I've been very careful about, criticizing our law enforcement here. I want to say that there's a difference between abusing the law and enforcing an abusive law, and what we have is the latter. And it's great, for example, there's the AG in the last 10 years hasn't actually pursued anybody's homes. It's cars, cash, firearms. But the fact that there's no due process, all those problems I talked about earlier, that you don't have, you are stuck in this separate civil proceeding where if you don't have a lawyer, you've got pretty much no chance of getting your stuff back. And since the amount of money is usually so low, it's not worth paying one. I mean, the deck is so stacked in favor of the government that We just have to change it. But and that's the point. I think that's ultimately will be the greatest virtue of Senate File 14, which again is up for final vote in the House of Representatives tomorrow. It's already passed the Senate 26-3. The great virtue will be in Wyoming. We can be very proud that as far as civil forfeiture goes, the huge problems haven't happened here. But I think it will be far more virtuous to say it can't happen here.
Right. All right. More with Steve from Wyoming Liberty Group in just a moment.
Smithers? You look exhausted.
Oh, sir, I was at the office half the night.
Really? Well, that's the third night this week.
Yes, sir. I just can't seem to stay away. I'm not sure what's gotten into me.
Dedication, son. I haven't seen that kind of work ethic in years.
Right. Well, I'll probably be at the office late again tonight. There's just so much to do.
You'll want to work late every night at the Office Saloon with Doc McGillicuddy Monday, Tap That Tuesdays, Screw It Wednesdays, Thirsty Thursdays, and thank God it's Friday with Bud and Bud Light specials. And at the office, you'll even want to work weekends, Saturday nights, ladies' nights, and mini-meet Sundays. Work late at the Office Saloon, U.S. Highway 14 in Gillette, Wyoming, out toward the airport.
Smithers, is there any luck with that client you've been chasing?
Oh, yes, sir. Last night, she gave me her phone number.
Attaboy, Smithers. Attaboy.
So, you turn the key in your car? Well, that's not good. Around to the front of your car and pop the hood. Yep. That's the engine, all right. So you tug on this and you pull on that and face it. You have no idea what you're doing. Don't touch that. Stop what you're doing before you get hurt. Get your car to Ideal Auto. Ideal Auto has the professionals that actually know what that stuff is and how it works. Ideal Auto, 2901 Dogwood Avenue, Gillette, Wyoming, 307-686-2259.
Howdy, folks. Do you like good olive oil, but can't find what you're looking for because it has 3 or 4 different countries of origin? Swede from Swede Specialties has 100% USA grown and pressed olive oil available for you. We even have flavor-infused olive oils like garlic, basil, and many more. Check out my website, swedespecialty.com, or give me a call, 307-686-0588, and enjoy.
I suppose you're planning a nice retirement, and you assume everything is paid for. But Wyoming didn't tell you. Who is paying for your pension?
And it's all your fault. I want to pay for this, but you're making me.
Find out more at wyoming2100.com.
When you dance like nobody is watching. And when you call Glenn, talk like the NSA and IRS are listening. Because most likely they are.
Guess who?
And they haven't had their daily dose of irreverent, insulting sarcasm today. We're counting on you. Call the show now.
Back in we go with Steve Klein from Wyoming Liberty Group down in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And Steve, Maureen told me you were following some other legislation down there. Is there stuff you're working on?
Yeah, no, it's been a very successful session so far, and again, a bill is not. It ain't something. It's really nothing till it's something. And but nevertheless, the interesting thing we talking about Senate File 14, the forfeiture bill, is that is being fast tracked. I mean, crossover. The House won't start considering the Senate files, and the Senate won't start considering the House files officially until next week, when all the deadlines for the original introductions pass. But here we have Senate File 14 kind of got fast-tracked, and there's a lot of discussion as to why this thing is moving at the speed it's moving. But I'm happy to see it as long as we get that great final vote tomorrow, and I hope it's a good strong vote, as strong as we had in the Senate. But
I'm really curious as to why the governor. I would like to have been a fly in the wall to hear the testimony as to why the governor might be opposed to it.
Well, it's all about, and again, like I said, there's the fact that the practice has been okay. Right, and then we really have to focus on the process itself. But people don't, some unfortunately don't really see that distinction. They see it as an attack on law enforcement and a kind of an accusation. And I deny that. I don't think that's true. I think I've been respectful with slip-ups now and then. But it's I think overall just a really will kind of respect the process and respect property owners. But otherwise, we have two pretty strong bills. The bills I'm working on the closest, the other one is House Bill 18, and that's another one of the Joint Judiciary Committee sponsored this bill, and it's called the Drone Protection Act. And we've talked a little bit about this before. And right now, the bill got kind of amended pretty significantly in the House, and I wasn't happy to see some of the changes. But the point is that it basically requires, with some exceptions, law enforcement to get a warrant before using drones for searches, for criminal investigations. That's now passed the House, I think, with 41 votes, so a little more than 2/3, not bad. And now that's going to head over to the Senate. Hopefully, maybe it'll be a committee next week already. So there's one.
What about if they are using the drone to search for someone who's missing? Do they need to get any special permission for that?
No, they don't. That's one of the exceptions, and I think the exceptions are broad enough to really allow for a lot of various things. Like, between Cheyenne and Gillette, we certainly have some very large power lines that I think right now they're using helicopters to monitor. You can see them sometimes when you're driving up 25 there. Maybe they'll be able to replace that with a drone, and I think that's perfectly legitimate. So the idea is to really just prevent, before it starts, the idea of what I call generalized and particularized surveillance. We have this Fourth Amendment right to privacy in our homes and on our persons, but for too long, and before the technology got advanced, the idea was, well, you're out in public, you don't have any real expectation of privacy. But I don't think that's true. I think when you and I are driving around, we don't expect to be followed by some eye in the sky just randomly. And unfortunately, as the cost of surveillance goes down, the amount of surveillance goes up. That's just a fact of life.
See, I've always, the analogy I like to make is, if I'm sitting, look, I'm not doing anything wrong, but I can expect that, you not to stare over my shoulder the whole time looking at what I'm reading. That would make me pretty uncomfortable, and frankly, I'd turn around and tell you to get lost. So I'm looking at government the same way. Unless I'm committing a crime, I really don't need you staring over my shoulder.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the bill also contains we learned, it was nice to hear during a committee, during testimony, that the only government agency that really has drones right now here in Wyoming is actually the university. So we put in a pretty broad reporting requirement just to get an idea of what the costs are. So there'll be a yearly report, maybe from other agencies as well as they pick up drones, but we'll at least get an idea of what the costs and maintenance is like. So that could be, I think, really beneficial. There is a sunset date on the whole bill, so I think in 2021. So it will kind of force the legislature, I hope, to revisit the issue, because it is developing, very, very quickly. But even since this bill got introduced, there's been some pretty, in particular, one revelation from the from Homeland Security, from the federal government, that they've been using traffic cams all over the country to follow citizens, monitor license plates.
Yeah, I remember that one. All right, Steve, where do they follow you at?
WhyLiberty.org.
All right. Thanks for coming on, as always.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.